So again, thank you for joining us. My name is Dina Arias with the Community Technical Assistance Center at NYU's McSilver Institute, and I would like to welcome you to today's offering, Community and Culturally Based Approaches to Healing from Trauma in Refugee and Immigrant Communities with Drs. Mulder and Miller. We are very excited for this offering given the social cultural context that we are currently living in. So there is a lot of information that folks are going to be covering today, so glad you are here with us today. I'm seeing a few folks who are joining us outside of New York, great, from Virginia, New York as well. Community health workers, clinical directors, coordinators, FOA coordinators, okay, for housing. Clearly, I think we know that housing is an issue that comes up for a lot of folks from immigrant and refugee communities. Upstate and downstate seems to be represented as well. So thank you so much all for joining us and thank you for sharing. Again, as we're giving folks some time to join in, I do want to just sort of orient us a little bit so everyone knows how to participate in today's event. Upon joining the webinar, you have been placed on mute to avoid any background noises that may distract others from listening to the presentation. If you come across any technical issues during today's event, please chat in to the CTEC host who will be able to assist you. If you would like to activate the closed captions, you can do so by clicking the tool bar button that says live transcript, and then you can select subtitles. We will also have a Q&A portion toward the end of the presentation, but we do ask that you please submit your questions using the chat box at any point in time during the webinar, just so that we can collect them on the back end and have those ready to go at the end of the presentation. And also at the end of the presentation, we have a short feedback survey. We would appreciate you completing it. Your feedback and suggestions do help to inform our future offerings. And lastly, the recording and slides for this presentation will be posted on our CTEC website, ctechny.org, within the next 2 to 3 business days. So on our next slide, I do want to highlight that this offering is eligible for 1 CE, the live viewing as well as the recording. But this is available to folks that meet the following criteria. You are licensed, present for at least 75% of the offering, you are using the Zoom link that you received, so no sharing of links, and that you are using a computer or a laptop. Utilizing a cell phone, unfortunately, is not acceptable for CEs. The CE registration will open tomorrow, but you will be receiving a very detailed email with instructions and all the necessary links that you need to obtain your CEs, also within the next 2 to 3 days. However, if you have any CE-related questions, you can certainly reach out to NYU Silver School via phone or email at silver.continuingeducation@nyu.edu. So I'm seeing a few folks who have joined us and have entered in where they are joining us from, your roles, your positions. So again, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. At this point, again, I do want to thank you all for joining us. We are very excited again to have with us Drs. Mulder and Miller, clinical psychologists in Massachusetts and team members at the Trauma and Community Resilience Center at Children's Hospital in Boston. So once again, thank you all. And I'm now going to turn it over to our presenters to get us started.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. We're excited to be here today. Just to start us off, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Alicia Miller. I'm a clinical psychologist in Massachusetts. I was born here in the United States, and I am of German, English, Irish, Norwegian, Swedish. I have a whole mix of cultures and cultural heritages that I come from. I grew up in a military family. We traveled a lot, not only in the United States, but also around the world. I'm fluent in English. I took French, Chinese, and Spanish languages in high school and college. So I know enough to travel a little bit and definitely order food wherever I am. I attended public schools growing up and went to community college to get an Associate's of Art. Afterwards, I went to a small private university in Minnesota for a BA. I went on to get a master's from Brandeis University and then a doctoral degree in clinical psychology from Boston University in Massachusetts. I've been married for a long time to a man who immigrated to the US from India. And together we are raising a really awesome 11-year-old girl here in the United States. Professionally, I have a deep belief in sharing power with the clients that I work with and working in collaboration in healing and wellness. I would love to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Luna Mulder.
Thank you, Alicia. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Luna Mulder, also a clinical psychologist. And just a little bit about my background and my statement of positionality. I was born in Bhutan, which is north of India, near Nepal. And I moved to the United States when I was 5 with my parents and my sisters because of my dad's work. And shortly after we moved to the United States, there was a civil war that broke out in Bhutan and ethnic cleansing, where the Bhutanese people of Nepali origin, including all of my relatives, along with over 100,000 others, were tortured, imprisoned, and forced to live in refugee camps in Nepal for 20 years. And the ethnic cleansing was a result of religious differences. So the Buddhists versus the Hindus. So I spent my childhood growing up in New York, but visiting my grandparents and cousins in refugee camps in Nepal each summer. So growing up like this, I became very aware of my privilege. I was able to earn a doctorate in psychology, and I believe that I have a unique perspective on forcibly displaced populations, as well as being able to navigate two very different cultures.
Wonderful. So we've already learned a little bit about you in the audience, but now we would love for you to answer our poll question. We would like to know, where in the world were you born? So you have to choose, it's forced choice. You have to choose the United States, Mexico, Canada, South America, Central America, Europe, Africa, Middle East, Asia, Australia, or Oceania, and then other. At the same point, we know um, that this may not include everybody. So we would love for you to write in the chat if you were, what state you were born in, if you were born in the United States, or what country that you were born in, so we can get a feeling of who's in the room with us.
So as the poll is percolating those results, you still have time to answer, but yeah, just want to jump in. And it seems that we have a lot of local representation in New York State, but also in the Caribbean, it seems as well. Across the US, Trinidad and Tobago, DC, a few that I'm seeing here. Ecuador.
Hmm.
Pennsylvania as well, seeing a few folks here close by and throughout other parts of the area and outside of the U.S. as well. Mexico
That's
is perfect.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the poll. So as we can see or hear about, our group here really represents what we know to be true about our field right now. So the majority of health providers are born, who are serving refugee and immigrant communities, are born in the US. So in fact, our room here is 78% born in the US, and nationally, the workforce is 80% of our workforce are white women. So it's great to see so many people here from the US, Mexico, South America, who were born Central America and Europe. Thank you so much. We're so happy to have you here with us today, and we hope that we can learn together. Today, we're really going to be talking about displaced persons in the United States. We're going to talk about trauma and the migration journey, core stressors for refugee and immigrant communities, and then we're going to focus in on trauma and healing, culturally responsive perspectives at the individual level, the family level, and the community level. So, to start with, let's talk about displaced persons in the United States and the migration journey. In 2023, the UNHCR, or the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, estimated that there were 114 million forcibly displaced persons worldwide. This is an unprecedented number in our history. 36.4 million of which were afforded the refugee status, and half of those are notably children under the age of 18. War in Ukraine and conflicts in Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Myanmar Droughts, floods, and insecurity in Somalia, as well as prolonged humanitarian crises in Afghanistan, have all been the main drivers for these unprecedented numbers. For the last few years, a majority of the refugees that are coming to the US are from Iraq, Syria, Myanmar, Ukraine, Afghanistan, Eritrea, and the DRC. And over the last couple of years, in New York specifically, refugees have been coming from the DRC, Syria, Afghanistan, and Myanmar. So this really maps on well professionally to what Luna and I know and understand, particularly with the groups that we work with in New York. Fleeing from their home countries, refugee and immigrants come to new countries with the hope of finding peace and a safe environment, which they can have hope and a new beginning. In fact, though, the very nature of being a refugee implies exposure to some sort of violence. And importantly, the term refugee also has this notion of refuge, or in other words, a safe haven. But in reality, being resettled in the United States does not guarantee relief from violence, nor does it guarantee safety. There are a number of common stressors that add to the challenges of adjusting to a new country and a new culture. We group these stressors into 4 different types: resettlement, acculturation, isolation, and trauma. Resettlement stressors are those stressors that individuals experience from being in a new country. They must navigate new financial and employment challenges, as well as new legal, educational, and healthcare systems. Acculturative stressors are the stressors that individuals experience as they navigate between their own culture, their culture of origin, and their new culture. Individuals must adjust to new cultural norms, language, food, customs, weather, among other things. Isolation stressors are stressors that individuals experience from being new or minorities in a new country. They may experience feelings of personal, cultural, or economic isolation. These feelings are often accompanied by feelings of loneliness and alienation. And then finally, we have trauma. Individuals who've experienced traumatic events may suffer from post-traumatic stress symptoms long after those events have occurred. Traumatic stress symptoms can create a variety of challenges, including disrupted sleep, an inability to focus, or form normal social relationships. The migration journey can be categorized into 3 different phases, and individuals may be exposed to potentially traumatic events at each one. In pre-migration, before fleeing, traumatic events may include direct exposure to or witnessing of violence, traumatic loss of family members or loved ones, sexual assault or gender-based violence, torture and detention, lack of access to basic resources. During migration, traumatic events may include long, dangerous journeys on foot, living in refugee camps, which are often crowded and dangerous, displacement, and then loss of separation from family. And then post-migration, upon resettlement in a new country, potentially traumatic events may include community violence, again, separation from family and country, poverty. And then finally, the pervasive uncertainty about what is happening now in real time, in addition to the uncertainty about what will happen in the future, can certainly be added to this list. When we think about and talk about children, it is helpful to draw upon the socio-ecological model originally developed by Bronfenbrenner. Ecological systems theory of child development states that the healthy development of a child is shaped by their environment. What this model shows us is that the developing child is nested within layers of a socio-ecology. So a child lives in a family, goes to a school, has a peer group, lives in a neighborhood and a community, and then at the broadest level is part of a culture, oftentimes more than one, and then lives in a nation. Displaced children have frequently experienced disruptions across all layers of their socioecology, which can have really profound implications. But at the individual level, when we think pre migration, many children have experienced horrific trauma. At the family level, some children experience separation from their caregivers at critical times when things are frightening and potentially unsafe, and some of them have even lost their family members. At the broader community level, they may experience what has been called a disruption in the basic scaffolding of childhood. So essentially, the structures we assume to be in place to support a growing child, such as adequate nutrition, healthcare, school systems, safe neighborhoods, have been torn apart. And finally, at the level of culture, their very identity and beliefs are targeted. During migration, all of these continue to be true, and sometimes the experiences along the journey can be worse than the reason that families flee to begin with. Post migration, in resettlement, we continue to see profound disruptions throughout the socio-ecology. At the individual level, trauma continues to play a role. There may be effects of previous trauma and also contending with new exposures to trauma or violence, like within the family or the community. At the family level, the effects of intergenerational trauma often shows. Parents may be struggling with their own effects of trauma, which interfere with their ability to care for their children in the way that they want to. Individuals must also contend with the loss of family. And within families, acculturation is a major stressor. Parents and children acculturate at different levels, which can really tear them apart and just when they need each other the most. Finally, at the broadest level, culture, many refugees struggle with discrimination and for reasons of ethnicity, religion, race, maybe they speak with an accent, among lots of other things. Many find that in their new country, their identity and sense of self is under fire as well. Today, we're going to be talking about Maria. Maria is a 15-year-old girl from El Salvador who is living in Texas with her mother. As we think about Maria and we think about the three phases of the migration journey, we know that pre migration, Maria was witness to parental interpersonal violence, that there was gang warfare in her neighborhood since the time she was born. She had limited access to school. Her mother left for the United States when Maria was 12, and Maria and her siblings went to live with her grandmother. During migration, at the age of 14, Maria traveled alone with a coyote or strangers to the United States. It was a long, dangerous journey by foot, and there was uncertainty about access to food and water throughout that journey. Once she made it to the border, post-migration, she was detained by the Border Patrol for several weeks, and then finally reunited with her mother. After a honeymoon phase of being reunited, there began to be conflict at home, and Maria stopped attending school. So, based on attitudes of autonomy and interdependence, all cultures in the world can be divided into two basic worldviews: individualistic and collectivistic. Grounding ourselves in understanding the difference between the individualistic and collectivistic worldviews is important because we are here in the United States living and working in an individualistic worldview and an individualistic healthcare system. Whereas most of our refugee and immigrant clients are coming from a collectivistic society and hold a collectivistic worldview. Of course, it is very important to note that there are always more differences within than between groups. So a range of attitudes and behaviors can be seen in any individual, any family, and any cultural group. So in individualistic cultures, there is an emphasis on autonomy, individual achievement, self-reliance, and self-assertiveness. Raising children becomes an individual matter. In collectivistic cultures, on the other hand, there is an emphasis on collective achievement, sharing, collaboration, maintaining harmony in relationships. Independence and self assertion is discouraged. Raising children is a community effort. So we're going to take everything we've learned so far, and we're going to think now and talk more in depth about trauma and healing and culturally responsive perspectives. Today, we are spending time focusing on how to balance one individual within the context of their family and their community. We do this because psychotherapy in general is often individualistic, insofar as we are centering one person, one couple, one family. We also do this because for many individuals, a traditionally Western approach to healing is not enough. Psychotherapy is but one way of navigating human suffering. There are many such innovations across human history, including religion, spirituality, poetry, music, exercise, among many others. All of these are tools that are used to navigate suffering and to build meaning, purpose, connection, moving from a sense of woundedness to wisdom. The challenge we have as providers working with refugee and immigrant communities that we must surmount is how to continue to support individual healing using the tools of traditional Western psychotherapies, while also using a holistic approach that honors and incorporates other ways of healing.
All right, so trauma and healing. So first, what I'm going to do is start with working with the individual child from the social ecology, and then move out from there to working with the family and then the larger community. So trauma and healing, what does that mean? Trauma, the actual definition, are experiences that are distressing and painful that overwhelms a person's ability to cope. We know that trauma can impact the brain, it impacts our bodies, it impacts how we see the world, how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about others. And healing from trauma means that one is no longer triggered by reminders and that they have integrated what has happened to them so that it no longer consumes them or impacts their functioning. So Summerfield, back in 1999, identified common assumptions about healing from trauma based on Western trauma theories. The first assumption is that healing from trauma is a linear process that involves moving from symptom reduction to full recovery. And a more culturally responsive perspective on healing is that healing is a non-linear process, meaning that the healing process is more complex and often does not progress smoothly from one stage to the next, and its impact can be passed down from generation to generation, so that intergenerational transmission of trauma. Another assumption is that Western psychological therapies are the only way to treat trauma. And Western psychological therapies can be an effective way, but we must be responsive to cultural understandings of trauma and healing. So for example, we know how important incorporating traditional practices and cultural meaning making is in the healing process. And we're going to share some examples of this a little bit later today in the presentation. And lastly, the assumption that trauma survivors need to be treated individually and separate from their experiences of their family and community. In collectivistic cultures, one's identity is in relationship to their family and their community. So one's experience of trauma and healing often needs to be understood and supported in the context of their family and their community. This idea that healing happens in relationships is really, really important. So in most evidence-based trauma models, there are common steps in healing from trauma when working with children and families. First, the current social environment must be safe. We must prioritize safety. So if we go back to the example of Maria from El Salvador, when working with her, we have to, before anything else, ensure that she is no longer witnessing violence or living in an unsafe situation where she is being harmed. So much of the interventions in the beginning is ensuring that Maria is living in a safe environment and she's not being harmed. We then help the child identify emotions and build their emotional vocabulary, so teaching emotion regulation skills. Many kids often say that they are angry. When you ask them, how did they feel when this happened? When something happens, they're triggered. Oftentimes, what is beneath the anger is fear or hurt or worry. So we must help kids identify and express this in healthy ways. And these emotions need to be validated and then soothed by caring adults in their life. Cultural expressions of emotions is also very important to consider. So, for example, in some cultures, openly expressing big emotions is considered inappropriate and could bring shame to the family. Words and language used for emotions can also vary widely. So, for example, in Nepali, we don't have a word for depressed. We don't have, some words just don't exist or translate perfectly from English into Nepali. But we do have words like stress and tension to talk about emotions. And so working closely with cultural liaisons or this cultural brokers, we'll talk about what cultural brokers are in a little bit, or people who know the language and culture is very, very important when working with children and families from different parts of the world. We also help the child practice healthy coping skills. So whatever coping skills may work for that child, whether it's deep breathing, whether it's journaling, whether it's exercise. And so for Maria, what was really helpful for her in terms of calming down her nervous system and regulating her emotions was taking a little space and listening to music. We must also work closely with caregivers and help them to be trauma informed. This means providing psychoeducation on the impact of trauma. Many may not understand that behaviors of their kids are coming from somewhere, that it's there because of things that have happened to them or things that they've been through, and that their child is not bad, right? So we really have to work very hard to kind of help caregivers understand this. So working with Maria's mom and other important adults in her life on how to consistently show love and care to their child to help with that caregiver and child attachment. We also address unhelpful beliefs. So for many kids who have experienced trauma, it's common for them to believe things like I am unlovable, there's something wrong with me. So maybe for Maria, things like people leave me, the world is unsafe. And if the beliefs are not helpful in their health and well-being, we can help to address and challenge some of this. After all of this is done, then we can help the child process past events and associated emotions if indicated. So for Maria, maybe some of the violence that she witnessed as a child and how it impacted her emotionally. And then finally, helping the child plan and take steps towards their future goals. So for Maria, what does she want to be? Does she want to graduate high school? What does she want to get? Does she want a job? And then the steps to help her get there. So when doing trauma narratives with refugee and immigrant youth, meaning helping kids process and integrate what has happened to them, there are some considerations that we recommend. So if we take the example of Maria and her witnessing interpersonal violence between her parents, we want to first consider the extent to which Maria perceives the past traumatic events to be truly traumatic and whether she experiences post-traumatic stress symptoms even after her social environment is safe and she has learned emotion regulation skills. And we also want to consider Maria and her mom's goals for treatment. And we always want to be working closely with our supervisors, with our peers, and then with cultural liaisons, if possible. So in addition to a trauma narrative, a timeline is another way to help kids organize what they have been through, to help kids understand and integrate their life story. So for children who have had to flee their homes, live in different countries, live in refugee camps, or they've endured many transitions, a timeline can be very helpful. And so here is an example of a timeline for Maria. So now I'm going to transition from working with the individual child to working with the family or the caregiving system. And culture and parenting. When parents and caregivers are parenting through the migration journey, they embody many strengths. They're fleeing war zones, violence, they're living in extreme poverty. Oftentimes they are doing their best to protect and give what they're able to their kids. The social ecological model at all the different levels that are critical in the development of a child, parents and caregivers are one of the most important. So caregivers who are responsive, they're consistent, they're effective, they're helpful, they're able to soothe, they're able to notice signs of distress in their kids. They can help to maintain that attachment and help their kids feel relative safety despite a world of chaos and uncertainty. Trauma and that resettlement process can be very stressful and may lead to a breakdown in that responsive, supportive parenting, right? As caregivers are searching for housing, they're trying to find employment, they're learning a new language, they're adjusting to a new culture. And then the trauma of what they have experienced, right? So when caregivers have experienced trauma, they may have a hard time regulating their own emotions. They may have their own survival state response. Sometimes they may take out their anger onto their kids. Some may abuse substances to cope with trauma. And all of this is going to impact how they parent and ultimately the healthy development of their kids. And so unbelievably important when working with children that we want to be working closely with caregivers and families to help them get the support that they need. So with that, what we're going to do now is we're going to show a short video clip of a therapy session between Maria and her mom. These are paid actors that we hired through Boston Children's Hospital, but it shows what the therapy session can look like when working with a clinician and with a cultural broker. So a cultural broker is a very unique role that we have in our intervention model called Trauma Systems Therapy for Refugees, or TSTR. A cultural broker is someone who speaks the same language and is from the same cultural background as the children and families being served. They are partners to the clinician and an important part of the team. They're different from interpreters in that they do not just interpret word for word, but they provide cultural context and background information so that there is understanding on all sides. So this is a clip of Maria and her mom. They're talking about their emotional experience of the past and hard things that have happened. And as you're watching this clip, we would like for you to just take note of what you noticed the therapist or the clinician, what they're doing, and also what the cultural broker is doing.
Maria said that that things were really hard and they all missed their mother so much, and that she had said that she was going to come and then bring everybody over, but everything was taking so long and she just couldn't wait anymore, so she came. And Mom responded that she didn't realize everything was going to take as long as it did. It took much longer than she expected to find a job and find a place to live. But she's happy that she's here now and she's able to help her. That she is glad because life is better here. Now, they have plenty to eat and Maria can just go to school, which she couldn't do in El Salvador as much because of the dangers. But Maria doesn't go to school anymore.
It sounds like you both missed each other so much. And it also sounds like it was really hard for Maria when you left.
Parece que las dos se extrañaban mucho y que también las cosas fueron muy difíciles para María cuando usted se fue.
Maria, what would you like to change in your life? What do you wish was different?
María, ¿qué es lo que quisieras cambiar en tu vida? ¿Qué es lo que quisieras que sea diferente?
No lo sé, supongo que solo quiero que mi mamá me deje en paz.
I don't know. I just wish my mom would leave me alone.
What do you mean?
¿Qué quieres decir?
No lo sé, como darme independencia y dejar de decirme cómo vivir mi vida.
Yo sigo siendo tu mamá y tú sigues siendo una niña. No, tú sigues siendo una niña y mi trabajo es protegerte.
Tú nos abandonaste y a ti no te importó protegernos en ese momento.
Tuve que irme para darnos una vida mejor a todos nosotros.
Oh, okay, un segundo, déjenme traducir para Janet. So, Maria obviously wants to be left alone, and mom is saying that she still has to listen to her because she's her daughter and her job is to protect her. But then Maria says, well, when she left, she left her and all her siblings, so she wasn't worried about being protected there. And mom responds, she's still a child, she's still her daughter. Yeah, that's her job.
Maria, it sounds like your mom cares about you very much and came here to create a better life for all of you.
María, suena como que tu mamá se preocupa mucho por ti y te quiere mucho. Y ella vino aquí para que tú y tus hermanos tengan una mejor vida.
And Mom, it sounds like Maria has a lot of anger about you leaving the family.
Y mamá, parece que María está muy enojada porque usted dejó a la familia entera detrás.
Si ella no me dijo cómo vivir mi vida todo este tiempo, ¿por qué cree que lo puede hacer ahora?
We will just stop there. There's a lot more. We only have time for a couple of minutes, unfortunately. But yeah, I see some great comments in the chat that the culture broker is narrating instead of interpreting verbatim. The therapist is validating and reflecting while showing empathy. That's exactly right. The role of the culture broker isn't just to interpret word for word, but to really try to explain the cultural context, provide background information, because that's so different. Like, it isn't just about language, right? Culture and context is so important. And the culture broker also is from El Salvador and had a similar kind of lived experience as Maria. And so is really able to kind of help bridge that gap between the provider and the family. And, you can see in the video that the clinician culture broker are trying to help mom understand Maria's perspective and help Maria understand mom's perspective. And they're beginning to talk about what they've been through. And the most important thing here is for family members to feel seen and heard from each other, to make room for each other's experiences so that they can soften towards each other and really build empathy for each other and what the other person has been through. But they also need to feel validated themselves. So really healing does happen in relationships and within families. And so that's what what we kind of hope to show in this video. And yeah, exactly. I see some more wonderful comments in this chat about language being important. And saying that the child felt abandoned should have been stated when translated. Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Sometimes when things are happening so quickly, things don't always get interpreted perfectly. So we always recommend the clinician and culture broker debriefing after, time with the child or with the family. What was missed? What was lost? Do we need to go back and restate something again? Because things are happening in the moment. You don't know what's going to happen. And so planning beforehand and then debriefing afterwards with the cultural broker or the interpreter, the cultural person that you're working with is really, really critical. All right, I think we're gonna keep moving along because we don't have too much time left. So what we're gonna do now is talk about there are two about common family narratives. There are two common family narratives for those who have been forcibly displaced. There's the past is past narrative and the past is strength narrative. The past is past narrative is the desire to move on from the traumatic experiences of war and displacement. So memories are either suppressed or compartmentalized, focusing instead on the present and future. And this is a very common coping mechanism. So for example, saying things like, I don't want to think about those things. We don't talk about those things. It's over. We have to think about the future now. And it's a very, again, like I said, a very common coping mechanism used by many. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes if it's not destabilizing or triggering, and if it's not harming themselves or other people in their life, and if they're able to function really well, which in rare situations, this can be the case, this narrative can be a form of resilience. The past is strength narrative. This is a way of processing trauma and finding meaning in suffering. It emphasizes the importance of remembering and learning from the past. It engages in storytelling, using memories to shape their personal and collective identities. So anger, loss, and sadness cannot be forgotten, but families can still position themselves as survivors. So for example, in thinking about all that we've been through, we are strong because of everything that we went through. So now what we're going to do is we're going to transition from working with the family, first the child, the family, and now with the larger community. So healing with forcibly displaced populations must take into account the social and cultural context. A culturally sensitive, community-based and family-based approach to trauma recovery is needed. And the focus really is on strengthening resilience of families and communities in addition to treating individual trauma symptoms. So how do we do all of this? So through community healing approaches, common cultural practices for healing include things like group conversation and talking about what happened over things like tea or while listening to music, dancing, quilt making, storytelling, praying, food. Nothing can bring people together like food and music. And in community healing, connection is what is healing. Incorporating community-based dialogue and storytelling can be a powerful tool for healing and resilience. When families openly discuss their experience of historical trauma, it can help to break the silence and shame that often surround these experiences. There's often no reparation process from those who cause the harm. So for example, governments who have forcibly displaced large groups of people, when harm has been caused, repairing the harm is a part of healing. And so when that does not happen, processing or talking about what happened becomes really important so that ancestral trauma or intergenerational transmission of trauma does not get passed down. This can also empower younger generations to understand their heritage, and it promotes positive ethnic identity development. So I've seen this happen many times throughout the United States with the Bhutanese community, people connecting as a part of healing. So gathering at local temples or community centers, praying, sharing music, food, tea, and talking through what they went through, saying things like, we went through a lot, we suffered, but we are stronger because of it. We are lucky now, we're here in this land of opportunity, and we can create new lives now. And the older generation are very aware of what stories they want to pass down to their children and grandchildren about why they were displaced. And oftentimes the narratives are focused on hope and strength. So things that are therapeutic are not always therapy. This is an example of a community wellness program for Cambodians in California. And we have an article based on this program in our references in the very end, which you'll get via email. But this is a wellness program that was implemented by 5 community-based organizations. And the program was aimed to reduce mental health disparities by using community-defined approaches. And this was a 6-month program comprised of community outreach, educational workshops on wellness, case management, and social and spiritual activities. It took place at Buddhist temples, and cultural and community events. So social activities like field trips and dance classes and creating a community garden, it helped to decrease that social isolation and increase opportunities to share personal stories. They also organized monthly water blessings and visits to Buddhist temples. They did yoga and group meditation to promote spiritual wellness. So this is a really great example. I encourage you to read this article of a cultural and community-based approach to healing that is not necessarily this Western-based kind of therapy that we tend to hear more about.
Thank you, Luna. Another thing that we want to highlight, and things that are therapeutic are not always therapy, right? Therapy has its place, but we want to expand our vision. And here we are uplifting this website of the National Compadres Network. The National Compadres Network, the philosophy is within the collective dignity, respect, trust, and love of all people exists the wisdom, practices, and resources for a healthy and harmonious well-being, which is beautiful. They do a lot of things to enact their mission. So the mission of the National Compadres Network is to strengthen and reroute the capacities of individuals, families, and communities to honor, rebalance, and redevelop the authentic identity, values, traditions, and indigenous practices of Chicano, Latino, Native, Raza, and other communities of color as a path to honoring all of their relations and lifelong well-being. So, like I said, they have many initiatives to try to meet their mission, including community kinship circles and men's retreats, fathers retreats, and radical healing practitioner networks. So we encourage you to check out their website when you have time. Another thing we want to highlight, another website is is the Healing Circles Global Network. So in May of 2023, the US Surgeon General released an advisory highlighting the epidemic of loneliness and isolation and on the transformative health benefits of social connection and community, which, according to this report, is as essential to our long-term survival as food and water. So we offer this Healing Circles Global website for you. Healing Circles, the concept of it, brings together people who seek meaning and connection, as well as all of those who share a challenging life experience, such as loneliness, grief, racism, aging, and illness. And through online circles, you can begin to realize how much you have in common with people all over the world. So, quoting the website about Healing Circles, together we explore ways of deepening our capacity to heal, alleviating our suffering, and finding meaning in both challenge and joys. So, again, we encourage you to explore this website. And as you can see, the quote on the beginning or on this page says, "If a circle touches the heart and helps guide you on your path, it is a healing circle." And then finally, Dr. Rachel Naomi Renman, an early pioneer of holistic and integrative medicine, is quoted as saying, the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is about as unrealistic as expecting us to walk through water without getting wet. So each of us is immersed every day, which highlights the importance of attending to ourselves. Today, we also ask you to focus on you as an individual, as someone who plays a role in the healing and helping of others. Explore the ways that a sense of community and belonging and cultural healing will be helpful to you as a healer. Thank you. And then we would like to open it up, and here's some perspectives of what you're going to take away from our presentation today. We're going to do a Padlet. Leslie is going to put a link in the chat, so you can click on the link and you will open it up to this page. On the page, you'll see this nice green image. You'll also see like a little orange plus sign. You can click the plus sign, write kind of what is one takeaway from today's presentation? What will you hold with you? What have you learned? What resonates with your practice? Questions you have, whatever you would like to share, please share with us. We're going to publish it. And then you click publish on the Padlet. And so we'll get to see what people are taking away from this. So I'm going to stop sharing screen right now, and I'll turn it over to Leslie. We can see a lot here, right? The importance of a cultural broker, a liaison when you're working with families, right? Healing starts with feeling seen. So powerful, right? Healing is cultural, right? And Western ideas about healing are not the only way forward. So again, balancing, right? We need to balance what we know from our Western psychotherapies to what we know and understand as cultural healing. How somebody understands what's wrong with them also indicates how they should be healed from it. And so asking that question, how do you feel like you can heal from what's hurting you, right? The power of community, beautiful. Cultural competent therapists and way to integrate this into the session, right? So broadening our scope, really hearing a lot about the importance of culture and community, right? Stepping outside of ourselves as practitioners, out of the way we maybe been trained in our Western cultural norms. We didn't talk about it a lot, but really kind of walking into the work with a sense of cultural humility, right? Being humble in our approach, right? Importance of safety in what we're doing. We're seeing a lot, right? Give meaning to suffering. Beautiful. Lovely. Luna, would you like to say anything?
No, this is beautiful. Yeah, this is exactly what we're hoping for. Some of the takeaways. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So you can continue to put it into the Padlet, but we will turn it over to our next slide. So we have some resources for you all. So we've developed kind of a handful of websites that are cool to go to that will give you lots of information about refugee and immigrants. We have our own website for the center that we work with at Boston Children's Hospital. We've developed a core stressor toolkit that you can access there, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. Lots of resources around interpretation. Next slide, please. In parenting also. And then we have a list of our references, so you can look at those articles that we're referencing. Next slide. And then finally, let's get to the Q&A. Have there been questions?
Yes, thank you so much. So yeah, we are now going to transition in the few minutes that we have left to really look at your questions. But first off, I do want to thank you for a really great presentation, Drs. Mulder and Milner. One of the questions that came in, and again, as a reminder to folks, please continue to put in your questions in the chat box. In regards to the video, this kind of parent-child communication may not be common in some cultures. Can you say something about how it is for families to engage with this kind of experience?
This is such a beautiful question. And yes, I think if I were to just watch this video in isolation without knowing all that it took to get the child and parent in that room talking in this way, I'd be like, this is not possible. It would never work in my culture. Like, parents don't talk to their kids this way at all. Usually it's kids talk to kids, or adults talk to other adults. And this like intergenerational emotional connection is less common. Really listening and being that emotional attunement. I think people have just been in survival mode for so long that, food, water, shelter, safety is first and foremost. So this emotional attunement, can be, it's just less common, and also culturally less common. So I love this question. And it took a really, 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 really long time, often takes a long time for a caregiver and a child to be able to speak to each other in this way. It took many months of therapy working with just Maria, and then with just mom, and getting the two of them together in family sessions to be able to have mom really understand the impact of trauma. She's not a bad child. She's not purposely just not going to school or not listening because she's a bad kid, but she's been through a lot. And oftentimes caregivers have so much shame and guilt too, that there can be this, like, it's hard to really go there. But I think if you're approaching the family system in each person with as much empathy and validation as possible, you can begin to break that ice. Ultimately, all parents and caregivers want their children to be happy, healthy, and they want them to do well in school, right? And so most also understand that in the US, things are different. Culture is different. We're going to have to parent a little bit differently. And so if, once that is understood, they are willing to engage in a different way of being with their children. But I love that question. And I know, like, I would definitely have that if all I saw was the video, but I think just understanding that it took a very long time, and often takes a long time to build that trust and get families to be able to communicate in this way.
Great, thank you so much. Another question that came in, can you say a little more about working through the past is past versus past as strengths perspectives?
I think, Luna, I'll just take this one. So I think it's not so much a matter of working through that, like in a therapy context, but understanding that there are different narratives that families hold, right? And it's not true for every single cultural group that they're going to hold on to one kind of narrative, like the past is past, but that individuals, families are making sense of their experience, and that both are powerful for different reasons. And so just having a working understanding of the worldview, and how the family prefers to see that, and also kind of expanding, this notion of what you've been through is strength. And so how do we talk about it, and understand it? So it's not working through it necessarily, but just living with it, sharing with it.
Great, thank you. And seeing if we can squeeze one more question in there. I'm a direct service provider and try to incorporate some of these into my practice, but I feel I'm doing this from the ground up in my agency. Do you have any advice on how to integrate this at the supervisory or organizational level to trickle down to providers, to the clients that folks are working with?
This is a tough one. We're always working with organizations around how can you, if you want to be a trauma-informed, culturally responsible agency, how do you do it? So I would say, if you can, to build a peer support network, show your supervisor this video, maybe do some brown bag lunches, or, gathering of other professionals, and stay strong. Know that you're not alone in this, that there are people across the nation who are doing this, and trying to do it more and more. I would say exponentially. This is becoming more tolerable, more acceptable, really an indication of the path forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And again, given the world that we're living in right now, certainly timely. So do appreciate that. I know our coordinator, Leslie, just put in a link for the feedback, but on the previous slide, or I'm sorry, on the next slide, I do want to just highlight a few upcoming events that we have for you all. Certainly would appreciate you joining us. Some are here specifically for supporting peers. So Help Me Help Youth, a new lens on approaching youth-guided care, hosted by two youth peer advocates. We do have a 2-day in-person workshop for fire setting. So for folks that are assessing youth for fire setting behaviors. And then our final two offerings for the month of June, applying an intersectional lens to mental health service delivery and supporting families with grief and loss. Also geared specifically for family peer advocates, but open to all. And with that, on our very final slide, I would like to thank you, Drs. Miller and Mulder, for a really important and timely presentation. Thank you also to our audience for attending today's webinar. As I mentioned, there is a link in your chat box for a feedback survey, very short. Please take time to fill it out. Again, it does help to inform our future offerings. For those that are looking for CEs, you will be receiving an email in the next 2 to 3 days with detailed information and links. And the slides and recording will be posted on our website, CTAC-NY, also within the next 2 to 3 days. If you have any questions or concerns, please email us at ctac.info@nyu.edu. And again, Drs. Mulder and Miller, thank you so much. And on behalf of CTAC, to the presenters and all that are attending, thank you so much for spending your day with us, and have a great rest of your day.